Welcome, everyone, to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 31st of August, 2017. Today we have a special guest who is Mike Stranks. And Mike, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you, Curtis.
Mike is a big background in recording live concerts, and that's a question that's come up a whole lot here in our little community. And it's something I have a little bit of experience with, but I wouldn't say by any means extensive experience. And by that, what I generally find is that there are a few things involved. Usually there's some sound reinforcement, so there's someone there with a mixer. They have everything set up with a PA system. And the job usually involves going up to the sound engineer there and convincing them that I have enough knowledge to to not be an annoyance to him or her, and to ask for a feed, to bring all my own equipment so that they don't have to go fumbling around for it, and then record that. But then also, ideally, have some microphones in the room, because if you just get the feed from the soundboard, it can sound a little sterile, a little too dry. And so that's about where my experience kind of rolls off. And that's why I was really excited to bring Mike on the show here. Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background with concerts?
Okay, well, I suppose most of my sound career has been involved in recording live situations, concerts, church services, all sorts of things like that. And that's where I cut my teeth, really. Way back in the 70s, I started when multi-tracks weren't even really known of in studios, let alone for us sort of semi-pros and just getting into pro guys. So it was, in those days, it was straight to mono. Then I went straight to stereo. And then in about the last 5, 6, 7 years, I suppose, I've had the luxury of multi-tracking, which to me is absolute bliss. 16 mics straight to stereo live certainly does concentrate the mind a little bit. So that's my background, really. So shall we kick off with making contact with guys who are on the soundboard, assuming you want to you want connections from that?
I think so, and I think that's a really good place to start, because I think getting their buy-in or their agreement is kind of the first challenge. So I think that's a great place to start.
Okay. What I like to do, as soon as I know I'm going to record a concert, I will get in touch with the promoter or the organizer, whoever, and say, okay, who's going to be running live sound for you? And I'll try and get in touch with them at least a week before and start a dialogue with them that makes them understand that I know what I'm doing. I tell them exactly what I would like. I tell them that I will bring the cables and any other gear that's needed. I will ask them what sockets they've got, because there's nothing worse than you turning up with XLRs and finding they're all TRS jacks. Oh dear, what do we do now, apart from panic? So all that sort of thing, so that when you turn up on the day, in a sense, you're best buddies, although you've never met, because you've had that dialogue. And you know what we techies are like once you start talking the language. Oh, you're one of us, that's great, you know. So it's then making that contact with them. And I think the other thing, too, is reassuring them in that build-up to the day that you're not going to do anything that compromises their live sound. That's what they're worried about above all, because I think we've all been in situations where we've been in a concert, big or small, something goes wrong with the sound, and instantly 250 heads swivel round 180 degrees to look in a disapproving manner at the guy on the soundboard. And if you've caused that problem for him, you are not going to be that popular. So that's what I say. Talk to people before you get there. And you may well need to talk to the promoter as well, and explain what you're doing. And we'll go into a little bit more, perhaps in a few minutes, about the issues that you need to deal with promoters and organisers, because those are slightly different skill sets, really, and things that you need to think about. And the other thing is, perhaps we can talk about that whole issue of to connect to the live board or not to connect to the live board. And there are different philosophies about that.
I think that's a great next step, in fact, because, the first time I did that, I connected to the live board. And by the time I got back to post and started editing, I thought, well, it sounds really clean, but it doesn't sound awesome.
Yeah. I think there are two things you need to be aware of. If you just try and take the live mix, be that a stereo mix or a mono mix, when you listen to that back, it will sound very strange indeed, because you've got, not only have you got the balance that's been set up for that room. So for instance, if you've got a lead guitarist with an over loud combo on stage, the live sound guy won't have put very much of that into the mix at all, because most of that will be coming directly off the stage. And the other thing is, they will have put all their own EQ on that. So if you take the live mix, it's a done deal. And that's, it's like trying to take the flour back out of a cake. It's a very, very difficult job to do. So I would say never, ever take the live mix unless it's A, a very simple concert, or B, a very, very big concert where everything has had to go through the live board and be balanced and mixed through the live board anyway. And even there, I would say, think long and hard about that. Now, I realise that some people will be going out to record a concert. Maybe they've got a camera, they've got a small recorder, they've got one or two mics. So in that situation, what are you going to do? And maybe we'll move on to that a bit later as well. But let's stick with the board for now. There's two ways that you can get a mix from the live sound mics out of the live sound system. One is to use, if it's an analog desk, one is to use the inserts on the desk, on the board, if the live people are not using those. Are you okay with the term inserts? Shall I explain inserts for those who may not be familiar with it? Yeah. An insert is Insert is basically a point where you can break into the signal chain in a channel. So it basically comes immediately after the gain control, the trim control on most boards. So what you can do there, and the way it works is it's a TRS jack on most boards, most desks, which takes a signal out into your external processor and then brings it back into the signal chain. So it's basically like cutting into the signal chain and patching something into it. Now, what you can do with live sound is put a jack into that, either a TRS jack or a TS jack, and feed that off into your desk. Now, that's one of the things, if you're going to do that, you need to be very, very sure that you're talking to the live sound guys and they have confidence that you know what you're doing. Because what can happen, if you get it wrong, you will actually cut dead that live sound channel for the live sound guys. Not a good idea. The best way of all of doing it is to have a cable with a TRS jack on one end and a TS jack on the other. The TRS jack goes into the desk board insert point, but the tip and the ring are shorted together. So what that means is, even if something goes wrong at the other end of that cable, you've still got continuity for live sound mixing. So that'll give you a feed. It's a clean feed. But these days, what I prefer to do is to use things called mic splitters. Mic splitter is basically either one little box with one XLR in and two XLRs out, or a bank of XLRs, 8 or 16 even, in with 16 or 32 out. And the idea is that one side of that goes to live, and the other side comes to you. But that again presupposes, of course, you've got enough inputs on your gear to deal with all those feeds you're getting. And the good thing about splitters is that they've got isolation transformers in them. And the direct side goes into the live desk, but you, as the recording guy, are coming off an isolation transformer. So that's another comfort, reassurance to them that actually whatever you're doing, you are galvanically isolated from them, and they're galvanically isolated from you. So most of the time these days, if I'm working with the live sound guys and using some of their feeds, I'll be using splitters. Little splitters, which are quite acceptable for the sort of thing we're doing, are only about $25 each, so they're not that expensive. The more professional rigs, ART do one. Behringer have just introduced one, which I think is quite competitively priced. But some people have said that you get a bit of level drop out of that Behringer one. But hey, you just turn the gain up a little bit. You know, it's no big deal. So that those are your options really if you're going to use the live sound board. But as I say, you do need to talk to the guys, explain what you're going to do, and reassure them, and then everything goes quite smoothly. If you turn up in the middle of sound check and say, I've been told it's all right for me to video, and I've been told it's all right for me to take a feed off the board, that's when you're going to hit problems.
Because at that point, those guys are busy as it is. They don't need they don't need any other disruptions because they've got a lot going on.
Yes, and I mean, for all you know, it could be that the talent on stage is not very happy with the sound that's either coming through front of house or back through their monitors, and the last thing they want is some little person trotting up saying, "Can I plug this in, please?" Doesn't go down well.
So this is interesting. A couple of things here. No, so just to kind of summarize this, if you're going to do it, the ideal way to do that is to use a mic splitter, because then you can bring in the individual microphone channels into your mixer and or recorder, and you can make a specialized mix that works better for a recorded situation versus a live sound situation.
That's right. And the other thing is, because you're using the splitter, anything on stage that needs phantom power, that's coming off the live desk. But you don't need to supply phantom power as well. I mean, in fact, if you do, because you're going through an isolation transformer, it will never get as far as the mic anyway, which is another good reason to have that isolation transformer there. Yeah. Okay,
good. So, but this is interesting. But so we've talked about getting a feed from the desk and the various ways you can do it. And to be honest, in my case, is I've just taken usually a stereo feed post fader. So I am getting their live mix. Now, the reason that's a problem is that sometimes they have to do some EQ to manage feedback in the room and things of that nature. And just all the interactions with the room are what they're kind of set up for, versus a recording. You don't necessarily want all that. And in fact, it can sound very odd.
Indeed. In fact, what we've got to think of is we need two separate mixes here. There's a mix for the room and for the audience, and there's a mix for the people who are going to be watching the video later with your soundtrack on it. And the two mixes are, in fact, very, very different.
So I get the impression that that's not your preferred way of doing it. So let's talk about what the alternatives are, or when it makes sense to use mic splitters, or when it may make more sense to actually set your own mics up in the room, or whatever other alternatives there are.
Right. What I would say is I realise that you've got to work with what you've got, and there's no point me or anyone else saying, "Oh, you can't possibly do that because you haven't got splitters and you've not got 16 mics you can deploy." That's just plain silly. People have got to go with what they've got. If you've got to come off the live desk, particularly now these days with digital, I would say talk to the guys about what they can give you, because they may be able to give you a mix which is different to their live mix. You know, digital boards these days have got so many auxiliary outputs. And this, again, is the advantage of talking to them perhaps a week before. You know, and try and not do it just by email if you want to do something a bit more complicated. But, you know, try and do it, pick up the phone or Skype or, you know, Google Hangout or whatever, and really talk through the issues with them. And I've found virtually every time I've done this, they've been very keen to help and to talk through the options with you. And as long as you can say to them, yeah, well, that would be good, but if you could give me that, that would be even better, they'll say, oh, yeah, we could do that, yeah. And you get there on the day, they're ready for you. They may have already started to set up that mix for you, so you just plug your 2 cables in or whatever, and you've got a much better balanced mix for you than what's going out into live sound into the room. So again, that's an option if you're really up against it in terms of inputs and kit that you've got yourself.
Okay. So I guess the question is what percentage of the time will you do something like that, getting a feed of some sort, whether it's via the inserts, via the stereo out or the mono out or mic splitters versus some other method?
Okay, it would be a combination of what is going to happen with my end product if it's designed, for instance, because I'm not just working with audio, with video, sometimes I'm just working pure audio as well. If I know it's going to be, say, for a track or 2 tracks on a live album, definitely splitters then. Into a multi-track machine, and I bring it back in and I build that mix, but still getting the live feel in post. If it's a very simple thing, like it may be a press conference or something like that, 1 or 2 mics on stage, by all means take a feed straight off the desk, the board in that case, because you're just making life complicated when you don't need to. So it's that balance, really. It's balancing between what kit you've got and making your life as easy as you can, but still keeping in mind what your end goal is and what your ideal solution is to get to that end goal. It's probably worth saying now, too, because you've already mentioned that anything coming straight off the board sounds very, very sterile. And you lose all the sense of live atmosphere. And so what I would do, if I'm recording off the board with splitters, I will still put up a pair of not live, that gives the wrong idea, a pair of ambience mics as well. Now, we're starting now to move into the area of what can you do as the video guy or gal that isn't going to upset the promoter and the audience. Because you've got stuff on stage, but if you then come trotting along with your nice big 3 and 4 meter stands to get some mics over the audience, to get some atmos off the audience and get some crowd reaction and whatnot, somebody somewhere is probably going to take a pretty dim view of that. So sometimes what I will do, if the live situation is basically quality speakers on speaker stands, I will actually clip mics onto the speaker stands, and I'm picking up live audience ambience that way. Otherwise, I will put probably to the sides of the stage, because you don't need to be critical about getting decent stereo image or anything like that. I will put well to the sides of the stage, even on the stage itself, if I'm allowed to, mics that pick up ambient sound. And perhaps perhaps at this point I can just talk a little bit about the sort of mics I use. What you need to be is as unobtrusive as possible. So irrespective of what stands you're putting them on, you don't want to put up some nice chromy, shiny, large diaphragm capacitor mics that look like a tin of beans or something sitting up there. You want it as small as possible and preferably as black as possible. So this is, there we are, let me just show you. This is the Line Audio CM3, and you can see there against my thumb. Is that in focus for you okay? How's that? Yeah, you can see against my thumb how small it is. These are made by a company called Line Audio, Swedish company, and you've got a link, I think, Curtis, that you can put up later for this. These are brilliant little mics. These are what's known as a hypocardioid mic, which in non-technical speak means wide cardioid. So it's a slightly wider pickup pattern than with conventional cardioid, but it does retain some cardioid characteristics. If I put them on their clips, or this one on its clip rather, you can see how small that is. So that tiny. It's about the size, just a little bit bigger than an XLR plug. So that's the mic, very, very small. The other thing I do to keep things as neat as possible is to use these adapter rods that I bought. They're made by K&M. The only place I can get them these days is from Thomann, the big German supplier of audio gear. And you can see it's 1 meter long, and it's very simply just a steel rod painted black with a European 3/8 inch mic stand clip adapter on that end, and the corresponding, there we go, socket on that end. So basically all that does is just screw onto the top of the stand, and that gives you another meter of height. Now, the stands that I would use would be round bass stands with the heavy basses on them. So again, your minimum of footfall, you're not putting a great tripod stand spread out over 3 or 4 feet there. You've got a round base which is probably no more than 10 inches. If you're worried, I mean, these mics are very, very light, so going straight up is no problem at all. If you're worried about that, one can easily put the sort of sandbags that you put on photographers' lighting stands onto the bases, just to keep things really, really stable. So that's a wide cardioid. Now, the other thing that they do, which again I use a lot, is very, very similar mic, but this time this one's an omnidirectional mic. And I use those a lot, particularly for things like choirs and things like that, spaced microphones. So we've talked there about mics that you use to pick up audience sound and audience ambience. And if it's a live situation and I want it to sound live, I will keep some of that in the mix all the time. It may be very, very low level, and you bring it up for applause and audience reaction and encore and all that stuff. But it's there all the time because it just gives that bloom to the sound that makes people think, ah, right, yes, we're looking at a live concert here. We're not just... Because it can be very disorientating, and our brains say, I'm looking at a picture here of a live concert, but what I'm hearing is as if they're in the studio. So just to put that ambience in from the live room just makes all the difference. Now, you can fake it to a degree with reverb, but it's better to start with that basic live ambience that you've got in the room. Because sometimes, somebody will be on stage and will crack a joke or something. They may be musos, but between two numbers, they'll crack a joke. Well, if you can capture the laughter of that, it just adds so much. Whereas if they make the joke and you hear nothing, it's gone down like a lead balloon for you, the listener at home. Whereas if you can hear the audience laughing and you're chuckling, you feel part of the audience. I'm there, I'm with them. And I guess that's part of my philosophy. The viewer or the listener needs to feel that they're there, that they're part of it, that it's not something that they've dropped into, that they're part of it and they're sharing in the experience.
Definitely. And in fact, that's how I felt so disappointed or, I guess disappointed with my first attempts at recording concerts, is I just got the sound from the board and it was that exact opposite, that very awkward. So the talk in between songs, the applause at the end, all of that just fell really flat, and it took the viewer of my piece, my video piece, immediately out of the experience, which was it was just not a pleasant experience. Yeah.
And particularly the concerts that I'm used to seeing on the television, when you start to look for it, you notice that the broadcasters are giving you, every so often, they're giving you audience shots to help you, you're here. I mean, the prime example for us over here is our huge music festival, the Glastonbury Music Festival. And all the time when the broadcasters are showing that, which is basically a broadcast of live, massive concert events, all the time they're showing you the crowd singing along, waving their hands, flying their flags, crowd surfing, all the rest of it. I was there. I couldn't be there. I didn't have the money for a ticket, but I saw it on the TV and I soaked up the atmosphere.
Yeah. Good. So that is specifically what you're talking about, those microphones that you place up near the stage or on the stage, depending on the circumstances. Those are to pick up the audience. Do you ever also set up microphones to actually capture the performance as well?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I guess overall these days it's probably about a 50-50 balance between taking at least some feed either from the live sound mics or having nothing to do with live sound whatsoever, or minimally, maybe one or two ano mics or something like that, but everything else I'm doing myself. Now, this now again is where we need to talk about squaring off promoters and organisers, because they're putting on an event, whether it's a free event or if it's a paid event, they're going to be even more twitchy about these things, where they want to present an event to an audience. If you come along and put goodness knows how much, what I call ironmongery, in line of sight between the audience and the performers on stage, nobody's going to be very happy. And when I started doing this, I mean, I'm talking 40 years ago now, I remember very clearly one concert where I'd been given permission to record a concert with a paying audience there. And I went in and started putting up my mics and big stands and all the rest of it. And suddenly the promoter comes steaming up and says, "You can't do that, the audience won't be able to see." And so that comes to another point. You have to be prepared to compromise. It's no good saying, but to get a decent sound, I need my microphones here. You have to say, well, actually, I can't do that. I need to put them here instead and make the best of it. And that's where using omnis can get you out of all sorts of trouble, because if you have to put them a bit wider than you would ideally like to, well, okay, you may have to guard against what's called the hole in the middle effect when you're using spaced omnis, which if they're too far apart in relation to the volume of sound coming off the stage, you can clearly hear a left and a right, but there's not much in the middle, so the two bits are not glued together. Church services is the one where I've had to do this again and again and again, not least for things like you have a choir processing down the aisle. So you can't just stick up a massive, great stereo mic array because that's the best place to capture what you want to capture. People have got to walk there. So spacing your mics apart, one each side of an aisle and whatnot, and they can process through the middle. That makes life far easier. And the other thing you have to be careful of is, well, I mean, optimally, quite often, you will want a mic like that. But that's going to shield people's faces who are watching from the audience or the congregation or whatever. So you need to put your mic down here at sort of, here we go. I'll sit up a bit so you can see. So it's at chin level, so they can still see the face of the person, but you're still getting a good sound. And again, mics that are as small as possible, as discreet as possible. And it does mean for me, for instance, some of my favourite mics I have to use with caution when I'm recording in that sort of situation, because they're the old style, bright, silvery satin finish type things, which, you know, are notorious for reflecting light and bouncing it back into people's eyes. Whereas black ones like these, which are slightly matte treated, just don't shine the light back in exactly the same way. So again, it's that thing of working with people, and going back to my situation where I just started setting up mics without any reference to anybody, understandably, the promoter took a dim view of that. Whereas if you start with the, is it all right if, then they may say, yeah, that would be fine, or no, it won't. One of the other tips that I've learned from a very well-known recording engineer here in the UK, his name's Tony Faulkner, very well-known classical recording engineer, is there are very clever mic arrays you can use, which mean you don't necessarily, if you're recording an orchestral concert, you don't have to spot mic all the way through the orchestra. Not least because it can be a real trip hazard for members of the orchestra, but it can be very visually obtrusive for people as well. And he's come up with this concept which is called there are actually two Faulkner arrays, but the one I use a lot, particularly for this type of thing, is the Faulkner 4-mic array. And again, I'm going to produce another bit of kit here. So this is a very, very wide, as you can see, stereo bar. Very, very different from your favourite Rode mic stereo bar, which is the 20 centimetres apart, or 20 centimetres in total. This one is actually upwards of 1 metre. And what Faulkner says, and I'll put my fingers here and hopefully you'll be able to see the distance between my fingers. Now, some Omni microphone purists will be having a fit of the vapours at this point, because that's the distance apart that Faulkner says you put your Omni mics. And then in the centre here, you put an ORTF. Yeah, it's basically, I've only got one mic here, but it's basically where you put a stereo pair like this, and the angle between them is 110 degrees, and the distance between the two capsules is 17 centimetres. Now, there's various different types of stereo mic configuration. There's XY, where you have the two capsules like that on top of each other, where you've got the two capsules as close as possible together. There's NOS, which is 90 degrees to each other and 20 centimeters apart. No, sorry, NOS is 30 centimeters apart, and DIN, which is, or DIN, which is, again, 90 degrees, and that's 20 centimeters apart. Sorry, I'm getting a bit nerdy here about mic angles. Now, you may say, oh, yeah, that's all very well, putting mics up, but how do you get them angled just to, you know, who carries a protractor around with them to get 110 degrees? And, you know, and a tape measure to get the 17 centimetres. Well, the good news is if you use something like the Rode stereo bar, sorry, I'm making sure, do shout if I'm showing things that aren't in the picture, by the way. This is marked up with the, I doubt if you'll see it there, but it's marked up with the ORTF distances. So when you've got your mics on, if that one is in direct line with that ORTF and this one is as well, you know you've got your distance right. And the other good thing is on here, don't know if you can see that, it's actually got the ORTF and the XY angles. So if you're parallel with those, you know you've got your angles right. But an even better solution, which I found in recent months, is to use these wonderful little guys. I've only got one CM3 here, but I'll use this, which are made by a company in the States, I think, called SRS. And this is a guy who's basically got a 3D printer. And what he will do, and he's already got loads and loads and loads on his inventory, and if you get in touch with him and tell him the precise measurements, he will make you these as one-offs and then keep them in his inventory as well. Now, let me just think. I think these are about somewhere between $20 and $30 a piece. But in terms of ease of setting them up, you know, you put your mic in, you put the XLR end flush with that end, and you're good to go. It's automatically set up. And he does it for a whole range of mic, loads and loads of the Neumanns, the DPAs, Scheups. So, yeah, these are really, really good. Now, you may think, hang on a minute, how does that fasten onto a mic stand? But this is from user feedback, because the original ones had what you would expect, which was a bit coming down here, and you can still get those. But people said to them, if I want to use something like a Rycote shock mount, you know, how do I use these, though the ones that you'd previously designed with a Rycote? So here we are. Here's a Rycote, one of Rycote's famous Invision shock mounts. So what you can do is you can simply clip into that like that, and the mic's on it, and you'd have another mic over here, and you're good to go. So, I mean, sometimes, if it's a small event, I will simply screw that on the top of the extension pole that I was talking about earlier, and off you go. Now, SRS are really, really good. So they're very, very proactive. So if you get in touch with them and say, could you do me, so they'll do you XY mounts, they'll do you NOS mounts, NOS, sorry, DIN, you know, you name it, they'll do it. And they're quite happily to do one-offs, believe it or not, because it's 3D printing. And then the patterns just become part of their inventory. So I thoroughly recommend those.
I guess there's one question that came up based on some things you were talking about earlier. You talked about you didn't want to put the mic so that it became a face mask, and you talked about moving the mic down.
Yeah.
would there be a time when you might want to boom it from above instead, or does that become more? I guess in that case, you'd have to have access somehow to, if they had a grid hanging above or something like that. So perhaps putting it down below is a little bit easier from a practical standpoint. Do you notice any difference in terms of the sound that you capture when you do that?
That's a very, very good point, Curtis, because normally, or let me rephrase that, ideally, you would probably want to hang mics above a choir, an orchestra, even an audience. But usually, in the way that we guys work, time is of the essence. We're not getting access to that venue 3 days before to start rigging. We go in, if we're lucky, perhaps 4 hours before, quite often 2 hours before. And so anything like this, which saves you the time, is just absolutely brilliant. This saves time. You don't have to worry about calculating your angles and so on. I mean, as it happens, I've made myself some templates for these out of bits of cardboard that I keep in my mic box. So it's fairly easy, but this is even easier. So yeah, ideally, I'd love to be able to hang mics above an audience, because you've solved several problems. You've got an optimum position for your mics, but you've got your cables out the way, and you haven't got, as I said, I've referred to it before, this ironmongery potentially in front in people's sight lines. But we just don't have the time. Now, in terms of booming, normally I wouldn't boom at all for something like that, because the audience would just think, what? They're used to going to concerts and seeing someone in front of a microphone like that, or even someone with a headset on, or a lavalier mic clipped here, or whatever. But I mean, you may be able to see just in the background there my Rode Blimp sitting on a shelf behind me. Can you imagine in a live situation, a concert situation, setting up a few Rode Blimps on the stage? It would not go down well at all. Having said that, everything I've said so far is being predicated on you've got a paying audience. In other words, you are the guest. If you're in a situation where you've put on the event, or someone else has put on the event specifically for it to be recorded or videoed or both, the audience has to put up with it. It's like a TV audience. They can't say, excuse me, could you move that camera? I can't see the actors properly. Tough luck, you're there as the audience. The primary purpose is to get the show. So, for instance, when I was recording for radio, I would take, huge, great stands. I would put the stands where I wanted them to be, and the people there would work around me. And so you do that. You put your mics in their optimum positions. You put them where you're going to get the best stereo image. You're not so concerned. I mean, that's an RE20 are you using there? RE20 microphone. Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't worry in that sort of situation putting an RE20 in front of someone, because that's going to give you the best sound. If you've got a paying audience, you probably wouldn't put an RE20 in front of someone. You'd use something a bit more discreet, one of the little Rode mics or something like that. So those are important things. If it's an event that has been organised specifically for video or radio or a live CD or whatever, then the audience does what you tell them, not the other way around. But it's important not to get those two muddled up.
For certain. A couple of other practical questions. So when you put say for example, microphones near the stage to capture audience and atmosphere, or any other mics you run up to stage to to actually mic the performers, cables.
Yeah.
Do you just run your cables parallel to the sound reinforcement snake and just just kind of borrow that channel?
Yes, absolutely. With the big proviso, of course, you are running balanced. If you're not running balanced cables, all bets are off in terms of what might happen. I've been in situations where I've run, without realizing perhaps what I was doing, run an unbalanced cable, across a busy live stage. And the amount of electrical mush that came down that line was unbelievable. And so I had to reconfigure the stage for my purposes to get away with that. So you can run your mic cables alongside mains cables quite happily, as long as you're balanced. If you're not balanced, you could get in all sorts of situations. I guess another thing to just touch on very quickly here too is an issue about potential ground loops, where if you are using main sockets on a stage and you're perhaps positioned at the back and you're taking power off of those, if they're not on exactly the same circuit, there's actually there's a potential difference between the two. And then when you listen to your recording, you will find all the way through you've got a lovely, maybe not as loud as that, but so again, isolation transformers will help you deal with stuff like that. So that's why splitters are a huge help. But normally, if I've got to have dispersed stuff that needs mains, I will run all of that off one main socket and use extension leads and extension boards to make sure I'm not going to be picking up a ground loop. Oh, and I guess it's worth saying for our less experienced listeners, the way you fix a ground loop is never by disconnecting the ground. It might work that time, but you may never have an opportunity to do it again because you'll be fried. It is very,
is it
very
possible
dangerous.
in fact, I've had that's another topic that's come up a fair bit lately as well. Is I've got this horrible hum. I'm recording in this live situation. So if you bring everything off of the same power, but you're also getting a feed from the mixing board who may be on a different circuit, is there a potential for a ground loop there as well?
Yes. If you're taking a mix from them, the way to solve that, and I don't have one in front of me at the moment, is to use basically an isolation transformer, which is a one-to-one transformer. So it's not doing anything to the audio or the voltage at all, but it's putting a physical isolation, because it's a transformer, between one side and the other. And what that means is any hum being generated, or there's no possibility of hum being generated here getting over to here, because there's no direct connection between the two systems. So now, as a matter of course, I would tend, either via splitters or via other means, if I'm not at all sure about the integrity of the signal that I'm going to be getting, I would put an isolation transformer in as a matter of course. Way back when I started, we used to transfer audio between point A and point B, basically over telephone circuits. And our telephone provider here in the UK was always insistent that on both ends of that circuit, you had a one-to-one isolation transformer. So, there was no risk at all of you squirting horrible voltages into their nice telephone circuits and blowing things out at exchanges. So it's something I've always grown up with.
Good. Well, I will say that first of all, thank you so much, Mike, for the time today. I've learned a ton of things. I feel like I'm in much better position next time the opportunity arises to record a live concert, that I have a better understanding of the different types of things I can do to make a better recording overall. So thank you
so
much for that. We really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure, Curtis. And maybe some other time we could, I'm sure there's some guys listening to us thinking, wow, that's all very well, but I'm here, I'm a guy with one camera and two microphones. What do I do? You know, we could perhaps talk about that sometime. What I would say is, if you're in that situation, you know, try and get a mic as near as you can to the live sound speakers and just go off those. You know, and work with that.
That is great. Well, thank you again, Mike. I think what we'll do is I've probably taken enough of your time for today, and I really appreciate that. So what we'll probably do is we'll go ahead and get this out to the audience here. It's a really nice start. Again, thanks for your generosity and the time that you've spent to talk with us today. And we may have some more questions for you in the future as well.
Yeah, there's probably going to be a ton of questions come up from this. And indeed, people saying, oh, I don't agree with that. I do it a different way. That's great. We can all learn from each other.
Yep, absolutely. Very good. Okay, thanks again.
Okay.